Welcome, this is Najma Minhas with Global Village Space. I'm joined today by Syed Muhammad Ali, who's the Executive Director of Strategic Affairs at the Center of Aerospace and Strategic Studies. Ali, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to look at the crisis which has encompassing Pakistan for the past couple of days and what are the strategic implications of this. So Ali, if I can directly ask you, today you wrote an article titled "The Rise of Religious Parties, Blind Love or Hybrid War." What did you mean by this?
Thank you so much. I'd like to pay my tribute to you and also to Global Village Space for providing me an opportunity to share my perspective with your viewers and also your readers. I think Pakistan is a country, it's a very interesting place for those who understand and follow regional politics, international security, domestic politics. And religious politics is also not something very recent. But what I have attempted to explain and analyze in my article today is that we need to look beyond the ideological and emotional motivation of the people on the street and try to understand it in a global and international context, that the motivation of those who are, resorting to expression of violent passion on the street might be very limited and personal, but how their behavior is used for advancing strategic interests of other countries is something which perhaps has not been done or discussed very often in a forum like this.
So
but I think it deserves some analysis.
The fact that right now this movement has come about in Pakistan at a juncture where 6 critical major events are happening in Pakistan. What are the events that you're referring to?
Exactly, because since 9/11, Pakistan saw a very difficult situation in the last 2 decades, and Pakistan's foreign office, several political leaderships, and also the military has been attempting to explain that this is all foreign funded, foreign sponsored. We are fighting a foreign sponsored war within our borders. This has been the state narrative for almost 20 years, irrespective of whoever was ruling in Islamabad. However, what is different and peculiar in case of TLP is that it is happening in the context of 6 very significant international, regional, and national developments. First off, the US president, as you know very well, has recently announced the decision to withdraw US military from Afghanistan. The second is that the Russian foreign minister made a very important visit to South Asia, in which Mr. Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, did not have an audience with him, but according to various reports, he offered practically unprecedented cooperation in all issues, areas to Pakistani leadership. The third is basically the upcoming budget, and also the FATF review, which is looming large. So if you look at these developments, then perhaps mobilizing and resorting to religious violence on the street in full view of international and national media provides an opportunity to a state or any actor who wants to internationally present Pakistan as an unstable country which does not deserve international cooperation or investment. So if our neighbor has any such intentions, I do not think um, the current crisis, could have offered anything better than what it did. But thankfully, things are moving in the right direction, and perhaps there are signs that perhaps the
So
government will
are
be
you
able to
basically saying
manage it.
that there's an international player involved in the current crisis we're seeing?
Um, I think there is a possibility that there could be several international players involved, but what is very clear is that unprecedented psychological, media, and cyber support was provided to augment and maximize the impact of whatever was happening in the Yatim Khana Chowk. So what I'm trying to say is that whatever was happening in a particular chalk by a few dozen or 100 people
Right.
is something of very, in strategic terms, very limited and tactical in nature. But how it is presented in the cyber world, on the internet, on the social media platforms and international media, actually magnifies its psychological effect uh, throughout the nation, to disturb the nation and to distract the foreign investors, and to internationally present Pakistan as a unstable country. The most significant thing in this particular episode was that the professionalism, the degree of planning, the coordination, the timing, and also the selection of meta narrative in the the social media
What
campaign,
do you mean?
which
I mean,
augmented, was unprecedented.
Ali, sorry, can you clarify when you say the meta narrative? I mean, what is it about the narrative in the, I mean, you're referring to social media and Twitter in particular. Why is it that the dots point to a bigger picture appearing here and not just people on the streets for what they ostensibly are saying for the love of the Prophet, peace be upon him? What is it about the metadata in those tweets and social media which makes you think that way?
There are three very clear characteristics which indicate and also to some extent prove that there was a deliberate, well-planned international strategy to maximize the international isolation of Pakistan through this tactical limited action. Three things. Number one, what was the demand of the people on the street? It was the removal of a certain diplomat of a country. That was the demand. And they claimed that they were motivated by the love for the last prophet of Muslim faith. In sharp contrast, the data and the meta narrative that was being articulated from so many social media platforms which were trying to highlight it had nothing to do with these two arguments. It was not even there. The demands of the protester were not there at all. It was conspicuous by absence. Their focus was that, and the meta narrative was essentially that Pakistan is facing civil war, and how that will be interpreted by foreign investors, by international diplomats, by the international community, that Pakistan is facing civil war. And that is not something, I'm sure, that even the TLP leadership or their negotiators had mentioned, stated, even alleged or attempted. So the sharp contrast in which even the narratives of those, or the demands of those who were actually protesting on the street, and the narrative, how it was shaped internationally to strategically advance the interests of our adversaries, and in an attempt to isolate Pakistan and present it in a bad light, was very, very clear. The third aspect of this international well-planned campaign was the degree of sophistication, the choice of timing, the coordination, and the amount of human and technological effort and resources that went into it. Okay. That was way beyond not just TLP, and let me unambiguously state that it is way beyond any political party, even a mainstream political party which may be in opposition in Pakistan. The top 2-3 trends on that day, which almost went into hundreds of thousands, that was perhaps not even humanly possible, and indicates a highly sophisticated advanced use of bots automatically trends. And I'm sure this capacity which went into causing so much psychological, political, diplomatic, and economic harm to Pakistan is way beyond the capacity of any even non-state actor, and let me say even political party of Pakistan. So this cannot be the interest or the agenda or even the capacity of any political party, even those which are mainstream in Pakistan. So the technical support was unprecedented, exceptional, and proves that the Indian footprint was not just visible, the narrative was essentially advancing the Indian strategic interests. And almost, as the Prime Minister also said, almost 70% of that content was actually traced back to the Indian IP addresses.
Various people have done that analysis as well. I mean, there's one thread that I've seen personally by Shoaib Tamoor, who refers to this, and he's done the whole analysis of how many of these accounts were Indian accounts when they were set up. They were set up in June, they were set up in early April, and how they hardly have any followers. So there's a lot of evidence which seems to back up what you're saying. And one interesting point that you mentioned in your article is that FATF headquarters, ironically, are also in Paris, France. And that is the ambassador you're asking for whom to be returned. And the implications of that and on your stance in June are something to think about. Now, I'd like us to move forward and just think about, so what does this mean for the state of Pakistan? How do we strategically deal with these issues where people within Pakistan are actually, for the sake of the love for the Prophet, peace be upon him, doing this? So these are the people, there are obviously a significant number of people who do believe in what they're saying, and then they're being used by these outside parties, supposedly. How do we deal with that as a state?
I think it's a very important question. And I think this needs to be simultaneously dealt with in several domains. But that at first requires a detailed and comprehensive review of this whole scenario, how it played out in different domains, and all the relevant institutions need to sit down and review it comprehensively and dispassionately. First off, I think we are all, I mean, most of the Pakistanis are Muslims. And I think, as I've written in my article, and you know, I'm also a Sayyid and a direct descendant of the last Prophet. So the love of the Prophet is one of the core and fundamental pillars of Muslim faith, beyond all interests and relations. But what has happened is, it is possible that some, you know, anti-state elements might sow or inculcate certain agendas and narratives in certain organizations and use that passion and emotion as a fuel to advance their interests on the, which was evident on the street. So that is very possible. So it is very important. I think the first thing is we need education. We need, in our education, it is good that our educational curriculum is being reviewed. So maybe in terms of internal security, these experiences and lessons should be reflected in the upgradation and improvement of our curriculum. that responsibility towards the state, tolerance of the people, diversity of the views, critical thinking. These things should be inculcated at the school level, not just in terms of what is being taught, but more importantly, how it is being taught. That is very important, because that's where it boils down to. Because if no matter if somebody becomes a PhD scholar or somebody becomes a mufti, but the method through which he or she has learned or acquired certain knowledge is dogmatic, and a method which does not allow critical reasoning and thinking and tolerance, then it is not just how much you know, but you know it in a manner that despite knowing a lot, you are not able to have a respectful, a logical, patient disagreement with people from different faiths and schools of thoughts. That is the first thing. Okay. Secondly, legally, I think there are measures in place. Number three, very important thing is, in a crisis like this, traditionally what happens is the law enforcement agencies administratively try to control the situation through kinetic force, whereas the negotiations are done by the political leadership. So this makes the political leadership very vulnerable, because frankly speaking, as a international security expert, they are not trained for it. They don't have, in advanced countries, crisis negotiation is a specialized field. There are people who do extensive training that how you are supposed to deal with anti-state elements, with non-state actors, with terrorists, with different organizations. That requires a very extensive, even psychological training as well. You need to understand the other person's psyche and then deal with it. It's not something that the political leadership has to do, either offering some compensation, incentives, or the law enforcement agencies have to just round him up. It needs to go beyond that. Thirdly, I think the law enforcement agencies also, in their planning, coordination, and training, needs to incorporate exercises which are not just physical, but based on scenarios which are likely in the context of hybrid warfare, the sort of situations we are likely to face, how they are going to be dealt with, not just physically and kinetically, but how different institutions, whether it's security institutions, whether it's intelligence agencies, whether it is the law enforcement agencies, whether it is police, with the district administration, the health service, how they will work together, how will they manage a crisis. And that will help us identify the issues which need to be resolved. And most importantly, in the cyber domain, which reflects a very alarming picture, that we need, I think the FIA has a cybercrime cell, but it needs significant revamping, not just in terms of technical capacity and human resource, but also what it is supposed to do. I was talking to a very senior police officer myself a couple of days ago, and I suggested what's stopping our FIA cybercrime cell from simply identifying the IP addresses of all the hostile tweets. And what is stopping our IT minister from doing a press conference 2 days ago? Okay, 70% of this is not Pakistani content. So, and this will actually help our negotiators when somebody is talking to TLP leadership, that why 70% of non-Pakistani, non-Muslim tweeters are supporting you. And that can actually help the negotiator. So that is very important. And lastly, I think our financial system, and somewhat related to the FATF, it will help if all this, anybody who has ever been involved in any anti-state activity, including disrupting or destroying any state property or public property, there needs to be a comprehensive national criminal database. It needs to be real-time and updated, and it needs to be shared with banking institutions, insurance companies, other organizations, so that the employment in any government organization, any loan, financial facility, these things need to be disincentivized, and the punishment is not just based on either physical imprisonment or fine. So these are some of my suggestions.
Ali, thank you so much for your time today. I think you've made some really interesting points at the end in how to deal with it. For me, the one that really stands out is that governments need to have ministers who are given some kind of crisis negotiation talks, because we're increasingly getting into these scenarios. And in the past, we've just relied on a certain minister having goodwill with the other side and going in and sorting out the issue. So I think some kind of training should be done there. Your points on the database and the forensic analysis also, I think it's something that the government really needs to think about. But thank you so much for your time today.
It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.